Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. I mean, depending on which time and the part of the world you all are connected. I am Manish Agarwal. I lead the infrastructure, corporate finance, and special sets group at KPMG in India. And it's my privilege to be a moderator for this panel with my esteemed panelist, where the theme is energy investments in a post-COVID sort of a world. Let me just start with introducing my panelist here. Mr. Gurdeep Singh, Chairman, Managing Director, NTPC. He is also holding the additional charge for Damodar Valley Corporation. Currently, the co-chair for Stewardship Board for Platform of Energy and Materials World Economic Forum. He graduated in mechanical engineering from NIT Kurukshetra and then did his management program from IIM Ahmedabad. A very illustrious career spanning over 3 decades in power sector. It's a privilege to know him. He has held many senior positions. Prior to joining NTPC, he was managing director at GSEC, and his visionary leadership transformed GSEC and made the company highly cost competitive and forward-looking. Pleasure to have you on board, Mr. Gudi.
Thank you.
Next panelist with me is Mr. Sarthak Bahuria. He's a chairman, Reliance BP Mobility Limited. Uh, he serves as a senior advisor at Reliance Industries to provide strategic direction and leadership to the new joint venture between RIL and British Petroleum, focused on the fuel retail business and work with the Reliance leadership team. He has headed several reputed organizations, uh, key being Scope. As the first vice president, he also represented Asia on the board of World LPG Association. He has been conferred honorary fellowship of Energy Institute UK. As an alumnus of St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and IIM Ahmedabad, he has also served as chairman IOCL and CMD BPCL. Welcome, Mr. Sathak. Pleasure to have you on a panel for this rich forum. Moving on, I mean, next panelist, I have Mr. SLC Das. He's a Director General of Hydrocarbons, Ministry of Petroleum and Gas. Mr. Das is an Indian Administrative Service Officer. In his career spanning over 26 years, he has served in various leadership positions across states, union territories, and across various sectors. He has also worked in the United Nations Office for Project Services in the health sector. An alumnus of Delhi University, LLB, Mr. Das also holds a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins University, USA. Pleasure to have you, Mr. Das.
Thank you so much.
Last but not the least, Sumant, I mean, is the founder and CMD Renew Power, uh, one of the largest clean energy companies. Sumant founded Renew Power way back in January 2011. He is a very passionate advocate for solutions related to climate change and sustainable development. He has recently authored a book, Fossil Free. I would strongly urge, if you guys have not read it, you must go through the book. Reimagining clean energy in a carbon constrained world, which is about the past, present, and future of the world's energy systems in the context of a changing climate, and spells out a playbook to create a carbon light future for. Also the CEO of Suzlon Energy. He has a master's degree in international affairs from Columbia University, a degree in business management from IIM Cal, and a BTech from IIT Delhi. So welcome to all my panelists. I think starting as a theme of the session is uh, we are in a post-COVID world, in an environment which actually nobody would have thought what we are going to see and what is going to sort of evolve as we are talking today. Uh, COVID has led to a sort of a reset, if I can use that word, for the policymakers, which has got sustainability as well as technology to the fore of the entire sort of a way the sector has been thought through. Not just investments point of view, but also the way the business is going to be carried forward. Sustainability is not limited just now to energy sector, but it has now a flow for downstreams and the other sectors, including transport. We all heard about UK talking about banning the petrol and the diesel cars by 2030, which is almost a decade earlier than what was the initial target set for. In this context, India is set to play a leading role. India aspires to play a leading role in this transition to a sustainable sort of an energy. And I think if I can recollect, the Honorable Prime Minister very beautifully laid down the seven key pillars of India's energy strategy going forward, clearly noting that India is going to be a very strong, very major energy consumer in the days to come. And these seven pillars very nicely laid down a context to the session that we are going to have, which is around the a gas-based economy. If I really say this, also a gas-based economy, more cleaner use of fossil fuels, uh, increasing sort of a way to get a biofuels usage in the energy basket, renewables to be 450 gigawatts by 2030, moving to a newer fuels like hydrogen cells, looking at the ways of electricity to decarbonize mobility, and a digital innovation across all the energy systems. I think if you really look at the seven pillars, that summarizes pretty much the entire context, or let's say the entire energy sector that we are in. Now, from that context, let's flow into the session, and I will come to you, Gurdeep, first. Uh, my first sort of a thing as an opening comment for each four of you to really look at, energy investments overall, focusing more on the opportunities as we are setting the context in the post-COVID world. You may talk about the overall sector or your specific sort of a sectors within the energy, and I will come around to each one of you. Starting with you, Gurdeep, first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Manish. Uh, I think you have summarized very well, but is it clear?
Yes, please. Please carry on.
Yeah. Thank you. So you have summarized very well, Manish. But as we all know that our per capita power consumption is quite low, and having given the accessibility to power to each and every household, at least the willing household, there is no reason that going forward we should be giving emphasis to the use of electricity as the main source of energy. And when it's electricity is not a something which is a natural resource, but it has to be just converted. The natural resource has to be converted to electricity, and in that context, electricity, I believe that it is going to be the fulcrum where you can really convert most of the natural resources investments, be it coming from renewables, which is going to be much more and will be keep getting the further pace going forward. Be it gas, I think the gas economy will also be requiring then some of this share in the energy investment as well as the energy consumption. And the coal is going to stay here for at least for 2 to 3 decades, if not more. And we will have to bring the kind of flexibility in the our existing plants, improve the efficiency and bringing the flexibility so that we can integrate the renewables as we go forward for increasing the percentage of renewable energy, be it coal based or be it kind of combined cycle, which is already we are having around 25 gigawatt. Out of that, mostly the 18 to 20 are standby. So there is a lot of possibility on the gas side. And once we are having the gas, be it a domestic or it's going to be LNG, I think there is another opportunities in that area. And then there will be a requirement of this once the energy consumption goes up. So starting from this coal, gas, or the generation side, I think there is a lot of requirement from the transmission, and more importantly, it has to be on the distribution network, because we have never tested these networks to start then feeding the power if then everybody is utilizing to their fullest requirement. And let us see that tomorrow even the cooking and the electric vehicles, the mobility is start consuming power more than what they are doing. Let's say it goes to the double. whether the last mile connectivity is still then it's able to really take up that kind of thing. And then the efficiency improvement and kind of bringing the technology or the digitalization, what you just mentioned, it will also be the huge area of the investment requirement into this. But more importantly, I think it will come back to the renewables, and I'm sure that when Sumant will be speaking, I think he will be just focusing on that, because he is now branded as the fossil-free man, as you rightly mentioned about the book. But I think this is the area which is going to take up the more landscape, and we as a corporate, we have already formed up our plans to go towards 132 gigawatt by 2030, and out of that around 30% will be in the renewable space. And we have been saying this clearly that we will be ramping up, and we have started participating into this competitive bids, which was not the case earlier. If you just recall, almost 2 years till 2 years back, we were just doing this most of the things on the cost plus basis. And hopefully we should be in a position to really capitalize on those areas much faster than only then getting the projects on the nomination basis. And then along with that, there is going to be a lot of synergy for going for the green hydrogen. I think this is another area where we are working on, and electrolyzer, I think that is another area where there is a lot of investment will be required. I think that's the one thing which we must keep in mind. And hydrogen, I think hydrogen will be occupying the much more space than even the batteries. So put all this together, there is no reason that we will be having a lot of opportunities for the investment. And we should not be just limiting to our country itself. I think the companies should start looking at something outside country also. And we also, as one of the largest power producer, we are just looking at some of the areas along with the International Solar Alliance, how we can really increase our footprints, not in the carbon, but reduce the carbon footprints and then increase our footprints in the other global places. So I think there is a great deal of opportunities which are going to come, and I don't know whether we can still call it post-COVID, because we don't know whether it has become post-COVID as of today. But one thing was very clear, that during COVID it was clearly came out that the importance of electricity was realized much more than what it could have been earlier than this event, though it was very unfortunate. But I think the people have really maintained the grid. Grid has really helped each and everyone to really keep the business going, to keep the life going, and that too also during the summertime when there was a lockdown. I think everybody has realized what it is. So going forward, we must really go for deepening this grid and increasing the renewable energy contribution, and along with that we have to bring the flexibility into coal-based and the gas-based power stations and try to go on feeding these plants. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Gurdeep, and you make some interesting comments and points around also the competitive bidding that you as an organization entered into, and I will come to that later. I think shifting to Mr. Das, I mean, your opening comments as to how you see from the overall sort of investment opportunity perspective, the entire stream. I mean, if you can cover upstream, downstream, and also the gas side of a thing, because there's a lot of focus. We have said that in the past that we want to be a gas-based economy. We have retreated that in the recent times as well. And how do you sort of see that vision sort of panning out? So, Mr. Das, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Manish. Spanning the entire hydrocarbon sector is actually a tall order, but I'll try to briefly, focus my narrative on the growth and opportunities basically in this sector, upstream, midstream, downstream, as you classify. Now, one basic thing is very clear that India, from a demand perspective, from a market perspective, we all know India is a growing large economy, the third largest in terms of PPP terms. But what has to be emphasized in the present context is that it also has very strong fundamentals. So if you see in the hydrocarbon sector, there has been a very high degree of resilience, and the demand recovery has been very remarkable. I mean, it has reached in all petrol, diesel, gas consumption, it has reached pre-COVID levels. So there's a very strong recovery already which has happened. It's a young workforce, it has a very good business ecosystem. So all these are characterize our economies. So I mentioned this in the context that India is going to be the main driver for energy, one of the main driver for energy consumption in the decades to come. So that is a very, that theme needs to be underlined, because that really would largely impact on the shape of things to come, particularly in the hydrocarbon sector and generally in the energy sector. And just to give you a few broad figures, it's currently the third largest energy consumer, third largest in oil, fourth largest in gas and LNG. The global share, but as the CMD and NTPC correctly highlighted, the current per capita energy consumption is pretty low. So our global share is 6% as measured in 2018. So that is slated to grow up to 12%, just double by 2050, which would be a massive growth in, actually, if you see in aggregate terms, it would be a massive growth. And it has been estimated that about 1.66 billion tons oil equivalent, that much of energy consumption, that would be the accretion to really reach the per capita energy level. So growth in per capita energy terms and aggregate terms as well, that is going to be a very important determinant of how the opportunities shape up in future across the energy sector, and particularly for the hydrocarbon sector. And hydrocarbon sector will continue to be relevant, as I'll explain. And you see the demand side would determine that. You see, we have the third largest vehicle fleet in the world. We are the fourth largest refiner of crude oil in the world. And if you just see the sheer scale and numbers, we have 65,000 retail outlets of hydrocarbon products, 16,000 kilometers of product pipeline, 18,000 kilometers of operational gas pipeline, and 6 LNG terminals. So this is a very largest infrastructure, and that's the point I wanted to emphasize, is that considering the demand scenario and the emerging growth narrative of the country, the growth trajectory which the country is pursuing, the per capita energy consumption is going to grow up significantly, the aggregate energy demand will go up massively, and that in India would remain the energy hub. That composition of energy and all those things are issues to be subsequently deliberated, but it would be the energy hub for the future. Now, just to look at some key aspects. Earlier in the morning, Anish had mentioned as the mega theme is really the change. Very aptly put, it's really change. So, whatever has happened in this scenario, so what are the key aspects of those change as we see it emerging? What are those emerging key aspects? So, one, as I mentioned, is the steady growth in energy consumption per se. The other would be increasing degree of self-reliance while not losing the quality or the competitive edge. And more importantly, the shift in the energy mix towards, as already outlined by the Honorable Prime Minister, there will be a very significant shift in the energy mix towards low carbon footprint. So essentially, it will mean a lot of changes in the pattern energy is produced and consumed in this country, and on which today's discussion could largely focus on. A significant role for the biofuels and the renewables, and integration of the energy market, and enhanced efficiencies, as CMD NTPC also mentioned, in various across the entire sector, production, consumption, etc. So all this really means that there would be a whole lot of new set of opportunities across the oil and gas value chain. We traditionally call it upstream, midstream, and downstream, but the opportunities would exist uniformly across the entire value chain of the oil and gas sector. Just to quickly name a few, like in the upstream sector, if you look at it, we are really opening up, and in the recent years, particularly in the recent few months also, some major landmark reforms which really tend to open up the sector even more, make it more investor friendly, promote ease of doing business. Those reforms have been ushered in. Marketing and pricing freedom has been given. The entire exploration has been designed based on exploratory work program. There is a single license now required for all kinds of hydrocarbons. So the regulatory overload has been reduced. The early monetization schemes have been introduced so that one can quickly monetize discoveries. And of course, all of us know 100% FDI through automatic route is permitted. Now, given all these things, and if you see, coupled with the fact that about 30 billion tons of oil equivalent remain undiscovered in this country, they are assessed but not yet discovered. This is a huge, itself is a huge opportunity. And given the hydrocarbon exploratory license policy, which is extremely investor friendly, the investor can come, just look at our national data repository, carve out his own blocks of his own choice. He's free to carve out his own block and just go for it. And even in category 2 and 3 sedimentary basins, there's no revenue sharing also. There's zero revenue sharing. There just windfall profit formula is there. So essentially, this regime for exploration and production in the upstream hydrocarbon sector has been made very, very investor friendly. It is highly prospective, and certainly this is a time to really go in for it with all these reforms backing them up. Similarly, if you look at the midstream sector, the scenario is quite very, very promising there as well, because now the Prime Minister has launched the country on the one nation, one grid mantra. So that really means ushering in the gas-based economy at a very rapid pace and at a very unprecedented scale, which wasn't there earlier. For example, if you see the increase in the infrastructure, it is very kind of significant. Compared to 17,500 kilometers of trunk pipeline, we are adding another, almost doubling it up. So I'm adding another 17,000 kilometers of pipeline. Compared to 6 LNG terminals which we have, we are now going for 4 more. Similarly, the CGD, the city gas distribution coverage, now we are aiming at a very ambitious coverage now, which we are going to reach eventually. 53% of this massive area of the country, 70% of the population. So that's a huge coverage in itself. And about coming to the transport sector, which was mentioned, so 10,000 CNG stations are being planned for the transport sector alone, just to facilitate this shift towards cleaner energy. And in terms of the household consumption, again, to accelerate the shift towards clean energy, 40 million households are going to be put on the PNG pipeline. So all this mean that there's a lot of investment already lined up. For example, for the gas grid, which I mentioned in physical terms, now in fiscal terms, it translates to something like $13 billion US dollars of investment. For LNG terminals, about another 4 billion, and for CSD network 13 billion, and for transport sector, which remains an important determinant of our demand, there is a scheme called SATAT, which is it's essentially an acronym for sustainable alternatives towards affordable energy. So there's an allocation of 20 billion US dollars. So essentially, the idea of citing this, giving this broad snapshot, was that in midstream sector also, you see now we are really moving forward and we are very seriously and at a very large scale, we are going to usher in the gas-based economy, and all efforts are in that direction. Similarly, in the downstream sector also, there are a lot of opportunities. And as I mentioned, biofuels is a very important area, and the refiners are also getting into a lot of other alternative fuels at scale. And of course, the renewable sector in India, in the private sector itself, which Mr. Sinha here represents the entire renewable sector, that itself is coming up very, very fast in a very promising way. It's really a very, very encouraging trend to really look forward to. So in the refining sector also, petrochemicals, there are a lot of investment opportunities, and there are a lot of investments in the pipeline. Investment in petrochemicals, we are estimating about 110 billion. There are projects lined up to that in that direction. Then marketing, retail sale of gasoline and diesel, that is also another area. There's a massive expansion on the cards. So that is another investment opportunity. And the petrochemical industry itself, all of us know the multifarious uses where these downstream products have, right, ranging from health to anything. You can name anything and they find their use. So petrochemical industry itself is poised to grow at 10% CAGR to reach a size of about USD 100 billion by 2022. So petrochemicals itself is the oil to chemical story itself going to be a very prominent theme now. So all this means that if you look at the entire canvas of the hydrocarbon sector, upstream, midstream and downstream, the hydrocarbons will continue to be relevant in the country for various reasons, not only as energy source, but as source of various chemicals which find their use in various sectors and everyday lives. They will continue to be relevant, But what will, of course, happen is that the shift will be increasingly towards low carbon fuels. The energy mix would change within the hydrocarbon sector. The energy mix would change very dramatically. The efficiencies would go up very dramatically, and self-reliance with with a competitive edge, that would go up at a national level. So broadly, this is the direction we are moving. And as I illustrated by a few examples, you see there are a lot of opportunities. And here in the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, we have set up a very good ecosystem. So any investor, if he's welcome, if he contacts, there's a single point contact. If he contacts us with whatever investment idea in his mind, we have entire back end. The entire system is geared up to really respond very promptly with very good ease of doing business with absolutely hassle-free manner. So I use this opportunity to really pass on this message that investors should really come up, whichever sector, subsector they are interested in, the hydrocarbon sector, and certainly the outlook is very promising, and we'd see that they really are catered very well, and the ministry will see that the single window system which we have caters to their investment needs and responds to them adequately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Das. I think you made a couple of interesting points, and I will come to that towards the later part, be it in terms of biofuels or alternative fuels. But what is the scale we are talking about? You look at LNG terminals and the import, and how does it sort of fit in with what Atmanirbhar we are talking about. So I will talk about some of those points. Coming to you, Sumant, I think overall investments, yes, but 2 or 3 specific pointers when you make that sort of a commentary. Your book Fossil Fuel, is it really a metaphor to say that we are fossil free, or as Mr. Gurdeep said, for the next 2 or 3 decades we will have a fossil fuel, if not more, or is it about, let's say, what is the increasing, maybe at the rate of exponential growth of renewables overall in the basket? That's what we mean by essentially fossil free. And second important component, which I think you have very beautifully brought out in the book, Sumant, and I think I want our audience to also hear about, is this entire transition. Because we keep on hearing about this transition being very painful, the ecosystem not being yet developed. For example, the grid capacity keeps coming in between, and there is a whole lot of white elephant in the form of a distribution side of a business as well, because that's the ultimate procurer, ultimate sort of off-taker for the sector. So I think from that sort of a context, Sumant, I'm happy to have your sort of views as to how you look at these investments and some of the challenges, and more importantly, a transition to that sort of economy that we are looking forward to.
Oh, that's a pretty broad question. So I'll try to unpack it a little bit and talk about some of the specific issues that you raised. So look, fossil free is not that we are fossil free today, not that we'll become fossil free in the next several decades, but I think fossil free is an aspiration. It's an aspiration that we should try to head towards. Now, how soon we get there is a function of many different factors, not least of which is technology, our ability to invest capital, our ability to execute different types of projects, our ability to phase out legacy assets, our ability to get in place the right regulatory policies and mechanisms, our ability to retrain people who are employed in the legacy sectors into newer sectors, our ability to change few parts of our systems like the DISCOM, the distribution part of the value chain that you talked about. So it depends on a number of different factors. What I was trying to actually say in the book essentially is that we're in the middle of an energy transition, and I think that is something that is now being recognized more and more. It was not something that was recognized 2 years ago when I wrote the book. There was a lot of skepticism about renewable energy in general. There was a sense of, is this still something that is a niche part of the value chain that only the climate change activists are trying to push upon us? So there was a lot of that skepticism and cynicism about the sector. And I just felt at that time that just looking forward into the future, that given the climate change imperative, given the declining cost curve of renewables, given the evolution of new technologies like storage, it was becoming apparent to me that renewables is going to become a much bigger part of our overall electrification agenda going forward than was being considered, and perhaps is still being considered. I would still argue that changes are going to happen faster than we are even anticipating right now. Because if there's one thing that this sector has taught me over the last several years, it is that people are not able to anticipate the pace of change rapidly enough. And so, therefore, the point I was really making in the book and in general also is really three things. Number one is that the electrification of this, or the greening of electrification is going to happen faster than we anticipate. Now technologies are at hand that give us the visibility of being able to forecast that yes, there are commercial solutions available that will make this commercially viable, this transition to greening of electricity. Now, as I said, the pace will depend on various factors, but certainly the tools are at hand for us to embark on that change. Number one. Number two, that today electricity accounts for only a third of the total energy consumption. Over time, there will be deepening electrification as well, as more and more sectors of the energy basket move into electricity. And so that is something that is a second transition that is playing out right now. And we are certainly seeing the leading edge of that in the area of automobile mobility, right, where electric vehicles obviously have become quite common now. But we still haven't seen that mass rollout that we need to see, but certainly that will begin to happen. And then over time, other sectors which are not electrified today, such as aviation, marine, the hard to abate sectors, all of those will also then start to become electrified slowly, again as new technologies become available in those areas. And the third thing, as I said, is that renewable energy is going to become more prolific across the energy value chain as well. And there are going to be new opportunities that develop that will start blurring the boundaries between electricity and energy. For example, green hydrogen is going to be a very interesting example of that, right? Where you start then using renewable energy at cheap rates to create a hydrogen, which you can then use to for natural gas, as a replacement for natural gas, or as a replacement for mobility at some point in time as well, especially when it comes to marine and aviation. So you start seeing some of the blurring of boundaries happening between electricity and energy as well as we go forward. So I think all of these changes are upon us right now, and therefore, we have this great opportunity here to really move forward on the whole area of climate change in a way that is commercially viable and that is good for the planet. And the last point I would make is that therefore there is this opportunity that exists for a country like India, because we are still at the very embryonic stage of this evolution, for us to really capture these opportunities by investing in them, by coming out with a large and deep local market, coupling along with that manufacturing and R&D and technology evolution, so we can in-house that as well. And if we can do all of that, then surely with the large market, with all of this, India can really become one of the global leaders in this sector that is going to become a very large part of the global chain going forward. Now, I'll just give you one or two very quick data points. Today, the entire oil and gas industry invests about $550 to $600 billion every year. The power sector industry, the renewable energy industry, invests about $300 billion. And now renewables forms almost 70-80% of all new investments that are going into the sector. So let's call it a total of $1 trillion that is going in to the entire energy infrastructure between oil and gas, conventional power and renewable energy. Globally going forward, if you just look at the forecast now for just for renewable energy, you will see that the kind of investments that are now being talked about globally every year is of the order of $1 to $1.2 trillion, which is equal to all the existing investments that we put into oil and gas and power and renewable energy. So this is going to be a mammoth industry going forward, and therefore, but it's still at an early stage. How can we as a country really capitalize on it is really the key question for us. And yes, we have to reform parts of our value chain like distribution and so on. I'm hopeful the government can get into doing that, but once it does, then this can all become very, very powerful as an opportunity for us to grow, create jobs, and really take the lead in manufacturing as well.
Thanks, Sumant, and I think, as always, very passionate, and we have been having these conversations during our ENRich for the last 2-3 years, and you have been coming very regularly. I've seen you how passionate you have been talking about it, rightly so, which you argue in your book, and comes out clearly what were the myths about the renewable sector and what had changed in the last 2 3 years, I still will have a view on that. There is no doubt to my mind the large opportunity that you talked about, how probably as a country we can capitalize that as well. I still feel that, I mean, on the same sort of a mirror, if you superimpose what happens, that had there been not a liquidity package coming in, what's happened to the sectors? How do you really look at that? We have been talking of distribution for so long, and when we want to start the reforms, we are talking of a small union territories, and we still have to set a something which gives me as an investor a comfort that what happens to the overall sector, which is a big pain point. And had there been no liquidity package by RECs and PFCs of the world, what would have happened to the various investors and the investments as well? So I will come to that part. Mr. Sathak, coming to you, I think, I mean, from a overall investments, one, very clearly keen to understand and hear your sort of a views as other participants and a panelists talk about. But I think when you mention that, I want to hear your views on two specific things as well. For the groups and the industrial houses like yours, when these technological changes are happening, I mean, we are still at a stage, as Sumant very rightly said, we are still evolving, and this technological innovations, you try to have a move towards a oil mobility to, let's say, e-mobility that we are looking at. In that sort of a context, when you make a large ticket size investment decisions, for example, how does a group think about that? What are the kind of a signposts you really look at from a risk perspective, as you convince your leadership to really say that, okay, these are the decisions despite all these contexts changing and the times we can really go about, and what are the signposts to look for? So Mr. Sathak, I mean, over to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I joined in a little late because I think there's something else going on also at the same time. And I had mentioned it to your colleague Anish that I'll be a little late. So my apologies for that. I
No
had
problem,
to
sir.
switch
Sure.
that meeting. And I think amongst other things, I'd like to just set the context first. The subject that we have, 1 minute,
Investment,
the subject that
investments in
we
energy
have
and natural
investing
resources
in energy
post-COVID world.
sources, and as you've seen from my, we are actually into the fuel retail business, and also getting into advanced mobility in a very big way, apart from in many other in initiatives like convenience and other things. So in terms of context, so that is the field that I'd like to talk about, particularly in as far as fuel retailing, uh, in in a post, I mean, scenario, both medium term, long term, and also in the context of the COVID pandemic. So one of the things that has been said earlier, and I'd like to just set the context, is that our biggest challenge continues to be twofold. That is the need for meeting rising energy demand and the same time reducing the carbon emissions. And this, of course, is what we want to do also, is shifting towards low carbon energy system. And of course, we are conscious of the fact that there is a strong correlation between human development and energy consumption. So that is context number one. The number two context, before I talk about what you said, there is the today that the center of gravity of energy demand, as we know, is now changing, which is now moving towards Asia, and the supply situation is also changing. US today is the largest producer of oil and gas, thanks to the shale gas and of course some of the oil that they have also started exporting. Uh, the other point that has been discussed earlier is, of course, the climate change initiatives. The way energy is consumed is also changing in real time. And the world is electrified, and energy has become a part of a broader services that are brought and sold in a digital world. So the challenges that we have and all of us have, of course, also ultimately also thrive, is the changing energy landscape also gives us a lot of, and uh, one of the points which has been mentioned earlier and I'd like to reiterate is that while the transition to low carbon energy is opening up huge business opportunities, there is no doubt that the absolute demand for fossil fuel will come down. But as far as the oil concerned, it will be mostly led by the reduction in coal, and it will be at least till 2030. We expect the absolute demand for fossil fuel to remain steady, if not a marginal growth. And as said earlier, it's expected that the renewables from existing 5% will go up to about 20%. So that is where we are, and the other point that I want to say is that the post-COVID, I think, has thrown up several challenges to us. One is the behavior of the people, and particularly in India, and which is now followed much faster than what it would have. The culture of work from home, the reluctance for people and the on using of public transport, and also has thrown up huge demand for two-wheelers and small vehicles, which has a direct impact on the sale of at least our petrol diesel. The conversion of CNG, thanks to the opening up of CNG and the progressive policies of MOP and NG and PNGRB, which where the CGD players are thriving, and more companies are now. We have 100 different CGD areas which have been already authorized. The real issue, I mean, like everything else, I think e-commerce opportunities have also become huge, and also huge not only in terms of deliveries of all products, whether it's consumable, also you'll be surprised to know that in terms of fossil fuels also. Today, the delivery of diesel, which is basically for transport industry and agriculture, has been permitted to be under regulated of PESO approval under certain conditions to be delivered towards the to the customers at their place, other than on transport. And today we find that more than 12 to 15% of the diesel, which is the highest, almost 40% of the barrel is consumed as diesel. Almost 10% is today being sold directly, not from the retail outlets, but through mobile dispensing units and smaller approved containers. And this is an opportunity we find post-COVID world that it is going to be even higher. We expect it to go to almost 20 to 25%. Eventually, it is also expected that the delivery of gasoline, which is currently not permitted under PESO rules for safety reasons, under certain conditions, eventually we will find also gas also being delivered home. So this is a new opportunity that has come. And of course, two other opportunities which are moving much faster than what should have happened, particularly in India, is one is digitization. Today, I think the way the digital because it is such is surprising, and the same digitization is also being extended to the
I think
on,
Mr. Sathak,
on like all other consumables. This is going to be rolled out much faster. And the third very important part, I think, which is gaining a lot of vehicles. We expect a huge boom already in the and thanks to e-commerce opportunities, there's a huge explosion in the demand of electric vehicles. Given several incentives, both by way of subsidies, by way of easier registration, opening up sites, and along with the opportunities that we are all looking at is today the biggest problem in electric vehicles is are two. One is the charging time, and secondly it is the mileage, the distance that can cover in charge. Both these
Mr.
technology
Sathak,
advancement, both these are being
Mr.
addressed.
Sathak, Mr. Sathak, I
Two
will
wheelers
come back to you.
particularly, we are
Mr. Sathak, Mr. Sathak, I will just come back to you. I will just come back to you because you covered a good sort of a spectrum of opportunities, and I
and
just want
then
to
it takes
go to
hardly
the
5 minutes to 8 minutes less
Mr. Sathak. Can
fill
you
the
hear me,
fuel.
please?
Battery
Mr.
swapping
Sathak, can you
stations
hear me,
also
please?
have become a big thing, and electric vehicle is a new opportunity that we find that's happening, and it is going the next 3 to 5 years. We expect that the
Mr. Sathak,
EV
can
will
you hear me,
become
please?
business
Mr.
which will
Sathak,
be yeah.
Can you just hear me? I mean, I will
Hello?
come back to you because I just want to cover. I want to just cover some of the other aspects as well. You covered a good sort of
Okay.
a spectrum of opportunities. I will just come back to you, Mr. Gurdeep. I mean, you mentioned a very important point at the start about the competitive bidding, and congratulations to you. I think you set a new benchmark. Now, my question to you is like this. I think this new bidding that we all discovered, does it actually, yeah, and this is my personal view. I'm not asking you as KPMG. Does it convey animal spirits from a public sector to announce their arrival in the bidding? Or is it going to be a new normal that this is a price that the sector should be expecting going forward as well? Or it is something, entry strategy to really look at the transition from fossil to a very large sort of a player who is now saying, as you very rightly said, that we just not do cost plus and let's look at the competitive bidding sort of a thing. So what is the strategy behind this, and do you expect this to be a new normal?
Manish, I think you have asked two, three questions in one go. But uh, first of all, I think the bidding price is a function how the bid is structured and what are the costs which are involved. Uh, in some of the cases, there are something for the charges for land, and if you are selling the power outside, then there will be some charges on that, etc., etc. And if the bid is simplified, then it's a different issue. Uh, but one thing is quite clear, that the direction is very clear, that what even I think it was pointed out earlier by the other speakers, that cost is coming down much faster than what it was envisaged. So if that is the reason, then why these prices for the power should also not come down? And we as a company, we will never try to get into that kind of bids where we will be just bidding on even taking loss. So rest assured that we have not really just taken this bid just for the entry purpose or something like that. This is not the first time. This is the fourth bid I think we have won, and we had been consistent, and we go through a complete due diligence before making the bid. Uh, this goes through the different levels of kind of iterations and different levels of vetting, and we have a very robust mechanism of the systems and procedures, so which cannot really move through that. So that you can rest assured. The way to go about in future is that whether we can really bring the scale into this, and whether we have to really depend on only the EPC players and they are going to come and construct the complete project for us, or whether we can really just segregate into some of the different packages and we can really bring this kind of value addition through that and the optimization of the cost. And furthermore, I think we all know that today there is a liquidity in the market and the bond market is really favorable. So I think if we really structure then from every side, from your technical part, from the specification part, from then your financing part of it. I think there is no reason that we should be in a position that this should be quite competitive. While you have said that whether in the next bid it is going to be less than what has come now, that will depend upon how the bid is structured. So I don't want to just say anything more. But if this is the similar bid is coming, I think it is likely that either it will be same or it can be little further down by a few paisa.
So I think what you're telling me is that it is going to be more a new normal and a thought out sort of a strategy, which is actually playing from what is happening in the ecosystem, right from a capital as well as a technological sort of reductions as well. I think before I come to Sumant, one more question to you. I think in your opening sort of remarks, Mr. Gurdeep, you made a very important, again, a comment, right? I mean, that we look at the energy sector now, not just renewables. We're looking at a new sort of fuels like hydrogen you talked about, new sort of a technology you talked about, charging infrastructure, etc. I think increasingly the way the sector pans out, a business model for any organization may probably sort of a drive from a multiple sort of a revenue models, different technology streams. Some may be predominantly existing and some may be little lesser, but the reality is going to be a different technology driven sort of a revenue streams. Now, in that sort of a context, how do you see a transition of an organization, a large organization like, for example, NTPCs, and which may be true for many other organizations as well, that organizational transition or a transformation also is required, given that what we are entering in this sort of a new evolved sort of a dimension for the sector? Any thoughts or views that you have?
Definitely, I think, Manish, again, this is not as an outcome of one day. We had been working on this for the last 4 or 5 years. And I must say that today we are having quite a good expertise, not in the only in the numbers, but also in the, I think they have got not only the expertise, but the experience also in this area. And we don't really jump into this only suddenly. While we were talking about whether it is going to be hydrogen, whether it's going to be mobility, whether it's going to be distribution tomorrow, I think there is the team which works, and there is a time of 3 to 4 years which people are engaged. And the good part is that company like ours, we can really sustain that kind of developmental or the part on our side. This renewable energy, what we are now contemplating is that we should be going towards the ultra mega renewable energy parks, and the size should be going towards in the gigawatt, not in the megawatts. I think that is what the other Honorable Prime Minister just mentioned in the RE Invest. So it started, and it's 10 years back. We were just when the first megawatt scale was dedicated to the nation. I think that was it, kind of the news. But today, I think we have already entered into the gigawatt scale. And more important, but thanks for asking that question, that we started in 1975 as a National Thermal Power Corporation. 2004, I think we became only NTPC Limited. And as of today, I think we are very clear that we have to really transform this company as an integrated energy company rather than the Thermal Power Corporation. I know that many of the people are not leaving that chance to call it a National Thermal Power Corporation, but I think that's because of this. You have been dealing with that kind of thing. So this should be becoming a truly integrated energy company, and the focal point should remain electricity. So everything else should be revolving around that. As we were just mentioning earlier, and as I just mentioned, that all the houses, if they are electrified, why there should be the other source of the energy which should be used by whether it is going to be the household or whether it is going to be the commercial, and tomorrow, to the extent possible, as far as the energy input is there, it should be electricity. And in that electricity, how we can bring in the different type of the energy, electricity produced. And the another point which is very, very important, which is going to come, it is that whether it should be only electricity or whether it should be energy. So again, we discussed about the green hydrogen. So whether it is really required to have the electricity from the wind or the solar and then transmit through the transmission line, or whether we should be having the hydrogen, green hydrogen, or ammonia, and or the other chemicals. I keep saying now, and we were debating whether the NTPC should be truly becoming national transport, power, and chemicals. It's not only then, it's no more the thermal. And with the kind of the developmental activities which are going towards the carbon capture, if there is a breakthrough like the renewables in case of the carbon capture, if we are able to really capture the CO2 at an affordable price and then have the green hydrogen, I think we are already having the chemical plant in the thermal plants. So the thermal plants will start becoming not only the power plants only, this will become a power plant plus chemical plants. And you would have already seen some of these, and it's this news item that we have already invited some bids if they can put up the industries which are power consuming industry in the spare land what we can provide, and if there are some changes are required from the regulatory side or the legally side, if you can really work around that, then this will be another area of the kind of diversification and making growth in that area. So I think the bottom line is that we should not remain only thermal power corporation, but we should become a integrated energy company. And at the same time, we are quite aware and conscious of the responsibility what we carry on our shoulder, that the first thing is that we have to make sure that the power is available and it is available at affordable price, and we go on greening this power generation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Gurdeep. Sumant, coming to you, I think two fundamental sort of questions, and I think one of them I had asked you about 2, 3 years back when this entire renewable sort of a transition started, what we started discovering in the bidding price. The first is what we witnessed 2 weeks back as a bidding price in the recent solar bids. Do you, as a larger sort of a context of the sector, see it a very sustainable from an investor's perspective? Because I know you talk to investors almost like every time. You talk to a lot of international investors, how they perceive these sort of a pricing, and then what it means from a context of investors again. While as an Indian sort of a consumer, and we talk about always electricity being more affordable, but whereas we are talking about returns for the investors also being something that they like to really have that investments going. That's the first question. And the second, again, coming back to the large opportunities, we still don't have seen. I don't think there is a doubt in the mind that this entire transition that we are making, as you very rightly said in your book as well, is non-reversible. The question is whether you make in 5 years, 2 years, 10 years, and that depends on, as you very rightly said, on the ecosystem and what we do as a country. But why are we still not seeing a large utilities of a global scale still coming to India? I think we are seeing a pension sovereign capital coming in, but we are yet to see with that scale and size of an opportunity, a large utilities coming in, which boils down to what happens on the distribution. And what is your thought? Actually, a distribution likely to see some light of a day in your sort of a thought process, having watched the sector so closely and so passionately?
Well, let me answer the second question first, and then I'll come back to the first one, because it's really about two different kinds of investors. The institutional investors is the first question in a sense, and the second one is around strategic investors. So look, the reality is that this transition is not just playing out in India, it's playing out everywhere in the world. And so right now, companies are spoiled for choice. Even their home markets are going through massive transitions. There are massive investment opportunities for them in the markets that they're operating in right now. And so therefore, they can deploy capital in a lot of different places right now. So the question of India is not therefore an outlier, that, we have a great opportunity here and nowhere else in the world, and therefore why is everybody not coming here? The reality is that everybody is ramping up their investment plans in renewable energy, as an example, and green hydrogen very, very significantly. It's just that those investments are being spread all over the world. And so therefore, India is one part of the global environment, and therefore, to the extent that they want to get some exposure in emerging markets or to India, they'll have maybe 1,000, 2,000 megawatt or 5,000 megawatt over a 5-6 year plan. But when you add up all the plans globally and in their home markets, it'll add up to a large number, right? So for example, 3 or 4 of the global oil and gas companies have a plan to get to 50 gigawatts by 2030. Much like NTPC's plan, also maybe NTPC's plan a little bit bigger. But certainly there are many companies that have announced those kinds of plans. Now of that, you can imagine that maybe 5 or 10% will find its way into India, of whatever is their global target by 2030. Now, so I think therefore you won't have any one very large entity, with the exception of NTPC operating in India, right? But you'll have a lot of a lot of large global companies with smaller presence in India. And of course, then there'll be a few homegrown companies like ours, which are also scaling up, and our scaling up will depend on our ability to execute and access to capital and so on. And so that brings us to the second question that you asked. At 2 rupees, are investors going to be happy to put in tremendous amounts of capital, the institutional investors, or not? Now, look, I think the reality is investors don't care about the tariff. What they care about is the returns. And as long as you can demonstrate that you can get returns at 2 rupees or 250 or 220 or whatever be the tariff, it doesn't matter, because as Gurdeep ji said, a lot of it depends upon the particular construct of that bid. And keep in mind that investors look for risk-adjusted returns. Now, in that specific bid, the risk was low because PPA signing was much clearer. The PLF were a little bit better because you could get access to certain state substations which maybe had slightly better PLFs, and gave you more ability to acquire land at cheaper prices. And then there were certain state level costs that were not imposed on that particular project, right? And then, of course, there are people who must have assumed certain financing assumptions on debt financing based on their balance sheet strength and size and so on. And so people made whatever assumptions they made. I think what is going to happen is that we'll obviously do as much of solar as we can as a country, but at some point we'll start hitting a peak on that, because it'll start ramping up in the daytime and going away at night time, and you can't just keep doing that. I mean, how much power, even if it's at 150, there's no point in buying any more power if you are getting surplus power in the daytime. You know, it can be free, but I don't want it. So therefore, the question is going to be, what are we going to start doing beyond that? And I think that is really where storage solutions, round-the-clock power solutions, this power being used for green hydrogen type of situations or ammonia, I think those are things that are going to become more value-added and interesting solutions that we'll have to also find applications for. And that is, I think, where you can then start setting up very large scale, gigawatt scale plants to really get into some of the other applications, perhaps. And that's where prices will keep going down, and you can carry on investing in those areas. But coming back, therefore, will investors be happy to invest? They will be happy to invest. The big point that you pointed out earlier is the issue of distribution company risk. And how do we mitigate that? Well, at some point, not everything will keep going through SECI, because at some point, if something, one little page goes wrong, okay, in that SECI, okay, then the whole edifice comes crumbling down. Just like we have right now with AP trying to do whatever they're doing on the discom side, if one little thing goes wrong on SECI, then that is going to cause us to start finding or looking for other solutions as well. So therefore, there's only so much eggs that we can put in that one basket also. So we have to just be aware of that.
Thanks, Sumant. And I think, that's always the biggest sort of a thing. Even in SECI as well, we have seen that how many PPAs didn't get signed for a long period of time, because ultimately it is only a vehicle in the channel. It's not an ultimate solution that you're wanting to address, which is largely your distribution side of it. I think, to my mind, we have come to an end of a session. And thanks to each one of you to make it as lively as it could be. I mean, energy as a sector is so wide. The different sort of a segments within the segments itself is so sort of a large, and then covering all that in a sort of a 40-45 minutes, but having a certain sort of a deep view, which is what each one of you sort of presented. I am sure that audience would have really enjoyed the entire session. So thanks again to all of you to make it a very, very lively session. Over to you, Puneet and Anvesha.
That was a power-packed discussion. Coming up are some great conversations, and don't forget to also visit our digital lounges and the networking zones.
Through the 2 days, you will hear some interesting conversations amongst experts on business themes related to digital, cyber, global capability centers, utility transformation, CFO priorities, and resource acquisition. We will also hear about inclusion in energy, especially in a post-COVID world, where business and social dynamics have altered considerably.
So thank you everybody for joining, and welcome to a key roundtable for ENRich 2020. ENRich is the flagship energy conclave for KPMG, where we talk about all the new happenings and trends